The glittering lights of the city danced off the glass walls of the exclusive gala, each shimmer a silent reminder that this world wasn't meant for everyone. Aria Bennett stood at the edge of the grand entrance, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and defiance. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in a room filled with powerful faces and whispered alliances, but something about the night called to her, daring her to step closer. Damian Cross, the man who orchestrated these events like a conductor commanding a symphony, noticed her immediately. Tall, imposing, and with a presence that could silence a room, he studied her with a sharp, almost predatory gaze. "This isn't for someone like you," he said, his voice cold but precise, cutting through the soft hum of conversation around them. Aria swallowed, caught between the sting of rejection and the flicker of intrigue she couldn't suppress. Before she could answer, he stepped forward, his hand brushing against the velvet rope that separated the privileged from the curious. In one swift motion, he guided her into a side room and locked the door behind her. "Stay here," he said, and then without waiting for a response he left. The sound of his footsteps faded, leaving Aria alone with her thoughts, the echo of his words bouncing around the room. Anger bubbled inside her, but so did curiosity. Who was this man that wielded authority like a shield, yet somehow ignited a spark of daring in those he dismissed? She paced the small room, her mind racing, imagining the world beyond the locked door, and the man who had just shown her both challenge and fascination. And somewhere, beyond the confines of the gala, Damian Cross was already thinking about the girl bold enough to stand in his way. Aria pressed her back against the door, heart still racing as the muffled sounds of the gala seeped through the walls. She had expected to wait alone, maybe even panic, but minutes passed and curiosity tugged at her. Who was this man, Damian Cross, who had the audacity to lock her inside a room like a child? And why, strangely, did she feel a pull toward him instead of pure anger? Suddenly the door clicked and Damian reappeared, leaning against the frame with an eyebrow arched. "Still here?" he asked, though his voice carried something softer this time, less command, more observation. Aria stood her ground, defiance bristling in her posture. "I didn't come all this way to leave because someone says I can't be here," she shot back. A faint, almost imperceptible smile flickered across Damian's face. He stepped inside, closing the door just enough to keep them alone but not trapped. For a moment, the air between them was thick with unspoken thoughts. They spoke of small things at first, the mundane details of the gala, the weather, a passing remark about the city skyline, but beneath the conversation was an undercurrent neither could ignore. A sudden noise from outside startled them both, and without thinking, Aria flinched. Damian instinctively moved closer, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders. It was only a hug, brief and simple, but it carried reassurance, a silent acknowledgement that she wasn't facing this moment alone. When they pulled apart, their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them, curiosity, respect, and a hint of something deeper. Damian realized he had underestimated the courage of the girl he had dismissed, and Aria felt a strange comfort in the presence of the man who had first locked her away. The night was far from over, and neither of them could have predicted how much this chance encounter would change everything. The gala continued beyond the locked door, a swirl of laughter, clinking glasses, and hushed negotiations, but inside time seemed to bend differently for Aria and Damian. She paced slowly, replaying the brief hug in her mind, wondering why it had left a warmth she hadn't expected. Meanwhile, Damian leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his usual composure slightly frayed. He wasn't used to being unsettled, not by a person and certainly not someone so daringly ordinary. When he finally opened the door to let her out, the world felt suddenly larger. Aria hesitated for a moment at the threshold, then turned to him. "Thank you for keeping me safe," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but her eyes held a mix of challenge and curiosity. Damian blinked. That simple acknowledgement, the courage to speak, the honesty in her tone, struck a chord he didn't know existed. He found himself rereading the words after she slipped through the crowd, heart unexpectedly tight in his chest. This was no ordinary encounter. The next day messages arrived, brief, polite, but unmistakably personal. A text from Aria: "I keep thinking about last night. Are you always this intimidating?" Damian's response lingered longer than usual, measured, careful. "Only to those who need it. Some surprises are worth discovering." Their correspondence became a game of wit and subtle challenge, each message a bridge between two worlds that should never intersect. And yet, every note, every glance, every fleeting touch and passing began to leave an imprint neither could deny. By the time Damian closed his office door that evening, he realized something startling. He wasn't thinking about the gala or the VIPs, or even the scandal he usually anticipated. He was thinking about her, Aria Bennett, the girl bold enough to cross the line and simple enough to make him feel human again. It wasn't long before Damian found a reason to see Aria outside the confines of the gala. A casual invitation, simple, almost innocent, led her to a quiet, art-filled cafe far from the glittering chaos of the city's elite. As she entered, the tension between them softened, replaced by curiosity and something neither had expected, ease. They sat across from each other at a small table, the world outside fading into muted background noise. Conversation flowed effortlessly, surprising them both. Aria spoke of her work, her ambitions, the little things that mattered to her daily life. Damian listened, genuinely captivated, seeing sides of her that had nothing to do with wealth or status. For the first time, the barriers between them felt irrelevant. A gust of cold wind rattled the cafe windows, and Aria shivered slightly. Without thinking, Damian reached over and pulled her into a comforting hug. It was soft, protective, and warm. More than just a gesture, it was an unspoken promise that she was safe in his presence. Aria felt her shoulders relax, the tension from the gala and the locked room melting away. Pulling back slightly, they held each other's gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Damian realized how rare it was to meet someone who challenged him and simultaneously made him feel grounded. Aria, in turn, recognized a gentleness beneath his imposing exterior that few ever saw. By the time they left the cafe, their worlds, so different, so unlikely, had begun to overlap. What started as a chance encounter at an exclusive gala had turned into something neither expected: connection, understanding, and the tender beginnings of trust. And though neither admitted it aloud yet, the hug lingered in their minds, a small but unmistakable step toward something lasting. The city lights stretched across the skyline, casting a golden glow over Aria as she stepped into the quiet courtyard Damian had chosen for their meeting. He was already there, waiting, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the empty street with a faint tension she hadn't noticed before. "You came," he said, a hint of surprise softening his usual commanding tone. "I did," Aria replied, curious about the invitation. "What's so important that you wanted to meet me here?" Damian hesitated, then sighed, leaning against the stone railing. For the first time, he allowed himself to speak of the pressures that weighed on him: expectations from family, the endless scrutiny of the elite world he inhabited, and the constant balancing act between duty and desire. His voice, steady yet vulnerable, drew Aria closer in ways words alone could not. Aria listened, offering small nods and the occasional soft smile, encouraging him without judgment. When she shared her own story, about the struggles she faced trying to be taken seriously in a world that often dismissed her, it created a bridge between them, connecting two lives that had seemed so different just days ago. At a pause in their conversation, Damian stepped forward instinctively, wrapping Aria in a gentle hug. Not a fleeting gesture, but a hug that carried gratitude, trust, and a silent promise of protection. Aria leaned into him, letting herself feel the comfort and safety he offered, her own tension easing in his embrace. When they pulled apart, neither spoke for a moment. Words were unnecessary, the hug had said everything. Both realized that these moments, these shared secrets and quiet touches, were forming the foundation of something far stronger than attraction. As they parted that evening, Damian watched Aria walk away, the memory of their hug lingering, knowing he had never felt this kind of connection before, and that he wanted more. The morning headlines blared across screens in Damian's office, a scandal threatening to tarnish his carefully built reputation. Emails and messages flooded in, each one a reminder of how quickly the world could turn against him. Normally he faced these storms alone, relying on his composure and sharp instincts. But today he didn't want to be alone. Aria arrived without hesitation, stepping into his office with the quiet confidence that had first caught his attention at the gala. "You don't have to do this alone," she said simply, setting down a folder she'd prepared. Damian raised an eyebrow, impressed by her initiative and fearlessness. They worked together, strategizing and planning, their conversations filled with respect and focus. Yet between charts and emails, moments of quiet connection emerged, shared smiles, lingering eye contact, and the occasional reassuring touch. It was during a tense pause, when Damian felt the weight of the world pressing down on him, that Aria stepped closer and wrapped him in a firm, comforting hug. Not a hug of pity, but one that spoke volumes. "I see you. I believe in you. You're not alone." Damian stiffened at first, and used to vulnerability, but then relaxed, letting himself feel the warmth and support she offered. It was grounding, a rare moment of peace in the chaos that surrounded him. By the end of the day, the immediate crisis had passed, not solved entirely but mitigated, and Damian realized something extraordinary. In Aria's presence, the world felt less daunting. She didn't care about his title or wealth, she saw him as a person, and that acknowledgement made him feel alive in ways he hadn't expected. As she left, their eyes met, and without words they shared another brief hug, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next together. Damian knew deep down that this was more than admiration or curiosity, it was the beginning of trust and something far deeper. The weekend air was crisp as Damian drove them out of the city, leaving the relentless buzz of headlines and high society behind. Aria gazed out the window, watching the landscape shift from concrete towers to rolling hills, a quiet calm settling over her. Damian, normally so focused on control, seemed lighter. There was a softness to his eyes she hadn't seen before, a willingness to just be present. They arrived at a small countryside inn, tucked away from the world. The kind of place where conversation stretched long into the evening, and silence wasn't uncomfortable. Damian suggested a walk along a nearby trail, and together they wandered under the canopy of trees, speaking little but feeling everything. At a clearing, Damian stopped and looked at her, the tension of the past weeks melting from his shoulders. "You make it hard to act like I'm always in control," he admitted quietly. Aria smiled, sensing the honesty in his voice. "Maybe some things aren't meant to be controlled," she replied softly. He stepped closer and without hesitation, wrapped her in a long, comforting hug. This time it wasn't just reassurance, it was acknowledgement of the connection they had been building, the trust and admiration that had grown with every shared secret and supportive gesture. Aria rested her head against his chest, feeling the steadiness of his heartbeat, the sincerity in his embrace. When they finally pulled apart, they laughed softly at the awkwardness of being so vulnerable, yet both knew it had shifted something fundamental. This hug, this weekend, had become a turning point, a moment that confirmed what neither had dared to admit fully: they were becoming indispensable to each other. As they continued walking side by side, the distance between their worlds seemed smaller, and for the first time, Damian imagined a future that included her, uncomplicated, genuine, and together. The evening sky was painted in shades of pink and gold as Aria and Damian settled on a quiet bench in the park. Silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged, as if the world had paused to let them breathe. Aria took a deep breath, her thoughts turning to memories she usually kept locked away, the doubts, the heartbreaks, and the fears she rarely shared with anyone. Damian noticed her hesitation and reached out, gently taking her hand. "You don't have to face them alone," he said quietly. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of understanding. For a moment, Aria's defenses faltered and she began to speak, not just about small regrets, but about the moments that had shaped her, the insecurities she had carried in silence. Damian listened intently, never interrupting, never judging. When it was his turn, he shared pieces of his own past, the pressures of a family legacy, the mistakes he had made, the loneliness that often accompanied his success. His voice held vulnerability he rarely revealed, and Aria felt honored by his trust. At the end of their conversation, neither said a word at first. Then, almost instinctively, Damian pulled Aria into a long, comforting hug. It was a hug that spoke of acceptance, safety, and the mutual understanding they had nurtured over time. Aria rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and the quiet reassurance of his presence. When they finally pulled away, their eyes met, and both recognized the truth. They had grown stronger together, not in spite of their pasts, but because of the courage it had taken to face them. In that moment, the bond between them deepened, built on honesty, trust, and the promise of always being there for one another. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, neither doubted that they were meant to face the future side by side. The night of the charity gala had returned, but this time the atmosphere felt different, less rigid, less intimidating. Damian had orchestrated a surprise that even Aria couldn't have anticipated. A small, private section of the event reserved just for them, a space away from the noise and scrutiny. He watched her arrive, her eyes wide with curiosity and delight, and felt a warmth in his chest that had little to do with pride or control. "You did all this for me?" Aria whispered, glancing around the intimate setup with soft lights and thoughtful touches that spoke to his care. Damian smiled, offering his hand. "Only for you. Some things are worth celebrating privately." Throughout the evening they moved through the event together, but it wasn't the gala itself that mattered. It was the quiet moments, when Damian pulled her into a hug after a brief misunderstanding, when Aria rested her head on his shoulder to watch the city lights, when their laughter mingled freely without concern for who was watching. Each hug, each glance, each shared smile became a statement. They were a team united in ways that no wealth, scandal, or expectation could break. At the end of the night, Damian took her aside to a balcony overlooking the city. The glow of the skyline mirrored the glow in her eyes, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them. He drew her close in a long, tender hug, the kind that spoke of gratitude, trust, and love unspoken. "Thank you, for being you," he murmured. Aria hugged him back, holding on tightly, knowing that their journey together had led to this moment of acknowledgement and promise. As they pulled apart, hand in hand, Damian realized something undeniable. This grand gesture wasn't about impressing anyone else. It was about showing Aria that she was his priority, now and always. The city was quiet that evening, the hum of traffic and chatter fading into a peaceful backdrop. Aria and Damian walked side by side along the river, the cool breeze carrying a sense of finality and new beginnings. Everything they had experienced, the locked room, the first hug, the shared secrets, the challenges, had led to this moment. Damian stopped and looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of admiration, tenderness, and certainty. "I used to think life was about control, about keeping the world at a distance," he said softly. "But with you, it's about trust, connection, and never letting go." Aria smiled, feeling her heart swell. "I never imagined someone like you could see me, not my mistakes, not my fears, but all of me," she replied. Without another word, Damian drew her close in a long, gentle hug, one that seemed to wrap up every emotion they had shared: fear, curiosity, trust, and growing love. Aria rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart and the reassurance of his presence. This hug wasn't just comfort, it was a promise. A promise that no matter what came next, they would face it together. When they finally pulled apart, their fingers intertwined, and both knew the truth without needing to speak it aloud. They were home in each other. The world outside could continue its chaos, but here, in this quiet embrace, they had found forever. As they walked back into the city lights, side by side and hearts aligned, the story of Aria and Damian became one not just of chance encounters, but of courage, trust, and love that would last a lifetime. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more captivating love stories. Your next favorite tale is just a click away.